Hey everyone, this is Jungkook. Before we start, I want to know where you're listening from. Drop your country in the comments below. I don't know why I said his name. It wasn't planned, it wasn't written on any cue card or part of the segment. I had done 100 interviews before. I knew what to say, what to avoid, what to dance around. But that day, something slipped. His name came out of me like breath. And in that moment, everything I had buried came rushing back. Jimin. I said it quietly, almost too softly for anyone to notice. But the moment I heard myself say it, my chest tightened, my hands felt cold. I looked up and saw the interviewer pause, just for a second. Then they smiled, continued, didn't push. But I saw it in their eyes, they noticed. And I knew the cameras had caught it. But the storm didn't start with that moment. No, that was just the echo. The real breaking had happened much earlier, in ways so quiet that even I didn't recognize them until it was too late. And now that I look back, I realize saying his name was the moment I admitted something I hadn't wanted to face. I had already lost him. And maybe the scariest part is I didn't even know when it happened. You see, people always think that love ends in loud arguments or slammed doors. But with Jimin and me, there was no explosion, no final fight, just a slow fading. Like the volume being turned down on a song you loved so much, you didn't even notice it was disappearing. We were everything to each other once. We shared stages, yes, but we shared silences too. Those late night hotel room talks, the quiet glances across dressing rooms, the way he could make me laugh when no one else could. I used to think I knew every version of him, but love isn't just about knowing someone. It's about holding on to them when the world starts to pull you in opposite directions. And I didn't hold on, or maybe I thought I had more time. When I said his name during that interview, I felt the weight of everything I hadn't said before. I didn't say it with bitterness or anger. It just came out. Like my heart had been waiting for a moment to breathe his name again. And even though I kept talking about music, about tour dates, about future projects, my mind was already gone. Back to the last real conversation we had, it wasn't dramatic. He had smiled that soft Jimin smile, the one that always looked like it held 1,000 secrets and a little sadness. He said, "Kook, do you think we'll still be like this in 10 years? And I laughed because I didn't know how to answer something that felt so far away and so close all at once. But now I realize that was him asking if I'd fight for us, if I'd see the storm coming. And I didn't. I smiled and said, of course, like a fool who thought some bonds could never break. But the truth is, time doesn't need permission to change people. Fame, pressure, schedules, silence, they all do the work quietly. And before you know it, you're not walking the same road anymore. The months that followed felt like walking through fog. We were still around each other, still singing, still performing. But something had shifted. The jokes weren't as effortless. The laughter didn't come as often. And the silences began to stretch, not the comfortable kind, but the heavy kind. The kind that fills the space between two people like a wall made of everything unsaid. Sometimes I'd reach for my phone late at night, open our chat, and just stare. I'd scroll up and reread the old messages, the photos, the emojis. Only we understood. And I'd want to type something. Anything, but I never did. I told myself he was busy, that I was busy, that we'd talk soon, but we didn't. And then one day, I woke up and realized it had been weeks. No calls, no messages, no check-ins. The silence between us had stopped feeling temporary. It had become a new kind of normal, and I hated that I had accepted it. So when I said his name during that interview, it wasn't a mistake. It was grief. It was memory. It was love that had nowhere else to go. Because even now, even with all the distance, even with all the silence, I still love him. Not in the way fans fantasize about. Not in the way the tabloids would twist. I loved him the way souls recognize each other. The way your heart quiets when he walks into the room. But love isn't always enough. Not when fear is louder. Not when silence is easier. After the interview, I sat in the car staring at nothing for a long time. My manager asked if I was okay, and I nodded. Of course I did, because what else could I say? I said his name. That's what I wanted to tell someone. That's what I wanted to scream. I said his name. And in doing so, I realized I hadn't spoken it out loud in months. That I had trained myself to avoid it. That the person who once lived at the center of my heart had become a shadow. I was too scared to chase. I don't know what he felt when he saw that clip, if he saw it at all. Maybe he rolled his eyes, maybe he smiled, maybe he felt nothing. And maybe that's the hardest part. Not knowing if you still live in someone's memory the way they still live in yours. All I know is this: when his name left my lips, something broke. Not in anger, not in pain, but in the quiet, heartbreaking way that things end when no one is brave enough to say goodbye. And that's when I realized I had already lost him. I used to believe that if two people loved each other enough, they'd always find their way back, no matter the silence, no matter the misunderstandings. Love, I thought, was the bridge that could carry you over any kind of distance. But love doesn't erase silence. It doesn't fill the space between two people unless it's spoken, nurtured, fought for. And we stopped fighting. There were times when I'd glance across the room and catch his eyes, and in that split second, everything would feel like it used to. Familiar, warm, alive. But then we'd both look away, as if acknowledging it would make it too real. As if remembering what we had would only hurt more. It was easier to pretend we had just grown apart naturally, that the closeness we once shared was a phase, a beautiful memory, nothing more. But that wasn't the truth. The truth is, we drifted because we were afraid. Afraid of what it would mean to say the things we felt out loud. Afraid of what would happen if the world knew. Afraid that once we acknowledged what we were, the image that held us together would crumble. So we stayed silent, both of us. But silence is deceptive. It can feel like peace on the surface, but underneath, it rots everything it touches. What once was a connection that felt sacred began to feel uncertain. What once was second nature started requiring effort. I remember one day after rehearsal, Jimin sat beside me in the practice room, quietly drinking water. We were both tired, our bodies aching, our minds scattered. He didn't say much, he never had to. But that day, he looked different. Not physically, but emotionally, like something in him was fading. "Do you ever think we'll be okay?" he asked me suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper. I froze, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I was afraid that saying the truth out loud would make it permanent. So I said the safest thing I could. "Yeah, we always are." But I saw the way he blinked slowly after I said it, like he knew I wasn't being honest, like he had hoped I'd say something else. And I realized in that moment he wasn't asking for reassurance. He was asking if I still saw him. And I did. God, I did. But I didn't know how to say that anymore. I'd lost the language we used to speak in the one built from late night talks, private jokes, and the silent understanding of everything unsaid. And once that language disappears, how do you ask someone to stay? After that day, we spoke less and less. Not out of anger, but out of fear. Every conversation felt rehearsed. Every moment filtered through what we were allowed to feel. The space between us filled with schedules, expectations, and the haunting pressure of being watched. He was still Jimin, kind, thoughtful, bright, but he had built walls I couldn't climb anymore. And I stopped trying. Maybe that's what hurts the most. Not the fights, not the separation, but the quiet agreement that neither of us would say the things that needed to be said. We chose silence because it was easier to carry than truth. But the weight of that silence, it was unbearable. Sometimes I'd look at our old photos, the ones where we weren't posing, the ones where we were just us. There was a light in his eyes back then, one I haven't seen in a long time. A freedom, a softness. And I'd wonder when exactly it disappeared. Was it the day I turned away instead of asking him what was wrong? Was it when he needed me to say something honest and I gave him something safe instead? Or was it the day I convinced myself we had more time? Time is a liar. It makes you believe you'll get another chance. That one day, the right words will come. That one day, you'll fix everything. But sometimes, there is no one day. Sometimes, the last time already happened and you didn't even know it. When I said Jimin's name in that interview, I think it was my heart's way of calling out to something I had long buried. a flare sent into the sky, hoping someone he would see it, maybe even respond. But I didn't hear from him. Not that night, not the next day, and maybe that silence was the answer I didn't want. Or maybe he didn't know how to answer either. Maybe we're both just two people still walking in parallel, unable to turn and find the other again. Too much unsaid, too much unhealed. I want to believe that what we shared wasn't a lie, that it wasn't just something that burned bright and burned out. I want to believe that even if we never speak again, even if we remain just names in each other's memories, what we had mattered, that it changed us, that it meant something, because it did. To me, it did. I just wish I had told him that while I still had the chance. There's something cruel about unfinished conversations. They haunt you not like a ghost, but like a song that keeps skipping just before the chorus. You know what's supposed to come next. You can feel it, but it never arrives. That's what Jimin became to me. A conversation I was too afraid to finish. There were moments small, unassuming, where I think both of us wanted to say more. To break the polite silence we had let grow between us and go back to the way things were. But every time we got close, we pulled away. Like two magnets spinning in the wrong direction, desperate to touch but constantly repelled by some invisible force. I remember this one night. It was after a shoot. Everyone was tired. The crew had packed up. The stylist had left. The other members had gone back to the hotel. But Jimin and I lingered. I was sitting on the edge of the stage, just swinging my legs, listening to the quiet hum of the empty venue. He sat next to me without saying a word, just sat there. For a while we didn't talk. The silence didn't feel tense. It felt like a question neither of us had the courage to ask. Then, out of nowhere, he said, "Do you ever miss us?" My heart paused. He didn't clarify what us meant. He didn't have to. I knew. And for a second, I wanted to say everything. I wanted to say I missed him so much. It physically hurt sometimes. That I'd scroll through old pictures and feel this ache in my chest. That I kept a playlist of songs that reminded me of him, but never had the nerve to tell him that. But instead, I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I didn't know how to handle the truth knocking on my ribs. "You're being dramatic," I said. He smiled, but not with his eyes. Not the way he used to. And then he stood up and said, "Maybe." I watched him walk away that night, knowing I just let another moment slip. Another door I didn't walk through. Another chance I didn't take. And when you do that enough times, the other person stops waiting. I think that's what happened to us. It wasn't one big thing. It was 1,000 tiny moments I failed to show up for. And each one chipped away at what we had until there was nothing left to stand on. Sometimes people ask me, "What happened between you and Jimin?" And I never know how to answer. Because how do you explain that you lost someone not because of betrayal or anger, but because of hesitation, because of fear? I was afraid of what our closeness would cost, afraid of what people would say if we leaned too far into what we were, afraid that loving someone, really loving them, might mean letting go of the version of myself the world wanted me to be. So I chose safety, and in doing so, I lost the one person who made me feel like I didn't have to perform to be seen. You know, there's a part of me that still reaches for him in rooms where he isn't, at restaurants we used to go to, at airports where we used to joke about getting lost on purpose, in songs that feel too much like memories. And the worst part is, I don't think he even knows that. Because I never told him, I never said, "I miss you." I never said, "I'm sorry." I never said, "I didn't mean to disappear." I just let the silence do the talking. I let pride and fear dress up as composure and professionalism. But inside, I was breaking. There was a time when he knew me better than anyone, knew when I was lying with a smile, knew when I needed to be left alone and when I needed someone to pull me back. He had this way of looking at me like he saw through the layers I didn't even realize I had. And losing that kind of understanding, it feels like losing a mirror you didn't know you relied on. Now, all I have are echoes. Echoes of laughter in hallways. Echoes of hands brushing unintentionally. Echoes of conversations that ended too early. I wish I could go back to that night on the stage and say what I meant. Yes, I miss us. I miss who I was when I was with you. And I miss the quiet way we used to exist next to each other without needing to explain ourselves to anyone. But I can't go back. And that's the ache I carry every day. Because when someone asks you if you miss them, it's usually because they've already started to let go. And I didn't even try to hold on. I've learned that silence doesn't protect love. It suffocates it. And I think in some part of my heart, I always believed that if I just kept quiet, if I stayed steady, if I didn't shake the ground beneath us, then maybe, just maybe, we could keep what we had. But love doesn't survive in stillness. It needs breath, movement, honesty. And I wasn't honest, not with him, not with myself. There were so many things I should have said, moments I could have spoken and didn't, words that lived in my chest but died on my tongue. Like the time he was crying in the back of the van after a long rehearsal. Everyone was quiet, no one said anything. We all knew he was tired, overwhelmed, stretched thin. I wanted to take his hand. I wanted to say, "You don't have to be strong tonight, I'll carry this with you." But I stayed silent. All the time he stood beside me on stage, just before we went out, and said, "Do you ever feel like none of this matters if we're not happy?" I knew what he meant. I felt it too. But I shrugged it off with a joke because it was easier than facing the cracks forming in our perfect world. That moment should have been the beginning of a real conversation. Instead, it became another missed opportunity. There's a kind of guilt that comes from looking back and realizing how many doors you never opened, how many chances you didn't take. I carry that guilt like a second skin now, because he was always reaching out in quiet ways, in questions, in glances, in silences, filled with meaning. And I thought I was protecting him by not making things more complicated. I thought staying quiet meant keeping us safe, but all it did was keep us apart. People think heartbreak is loud. They think it screams and shatters and burns everything down. But losing Jimin didn't happen in fire. It happened in whispers. It happened when I stopped telling him he mattered. When I let our moments pass like wine through my fingers. There was a time when he used to text me first about everything, his doubts, his excitement, his stupid little thoughts at 2 a.m. I used to be the person he ran to before the world saw any part of him. Then one day, the texts became fewer, the calls became shorter, and I told myself it was just life, just schedules, just fatigue. But deep down, I knew he was pulling back, and I didn't chase after him. I let pride and fear hold me in place when I should have run after him, screaming, "Please don't go, we haven't finished our story." I remember the last message he sent before everything truly changed. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't even emotional. Just a simple, "Hope you're doing okay, you've seemed quiet lately." And I didn't respond. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know how. How do you explain that you're quiet because you're afraid? That you're distant because you care too much? That you're silent because you don't trust your voice to hold everything you feel? So I waited. One day turned into two. Two into a week into a silence that still echoes in my head. And he never messaged again. I can't blame him. He tried, he reached out, he gave me every chance to meet him halfway. And I failed him, not with malice, but with inaction. And sometimes that's worse, because there was love. There was so much love. But love without expression, it starves. I should have said so many things. I miss you. You don't have to do this alone. I don't care about the cameras or the contracts or the consequences. I just want you to be okay. And most of all, I'm sorry I let the world's noise drown out the sound of us. But I didn't say any of it. And now his absence is louder than his presence ever was. That's the thing they never tell you about losing someone who's still alive. You see them everywhere. In songs, in scents, in moments you want to share. And you carry all the things you never said, like stones in your pockets, quiet, invisible, but unbearably heavy. Sometimes I wonder what would happen if I called him right now, if I just hit send, if I wrote, "I'm sorry, I miss you, can we talk?" But what if he's already moved on? What if I'm a chapter he's already closed? What if my silence was the final word in our story? I wish I knew. I wish I had been braver. Because the truth is, I didn't lose Jimin all at once. I lost him every time I chose silence over truth. And the part of me that still loves him, that part lives with the weight of every word I never said. Let me know when you're ready for part 5 by typing Lanjut. I've learned that silence doesn't protect love, it suffocates it. And I think in some part of my heart, I always believed that if I just kept quiet, if I stayed steady, if I didn't shake the ground beneath us, then maybe, just maybe, we could keep what we had. But love doesn't survive in stillness. It needs breath, movement, honesty. And I wasn't honest, not with him, not with myself. There were so many things I should have said, moments I could have spoken and didn't, words that lived in my chest but died on my tongue, like the time he was crying in the back of the van after a long rehearsal. Everyone was quiet, no one said anything. We all knew he was tired, overwhelmed, stretched thin. I wanted to take his hand. I wanted to say, "You don't have to be strong tonight. I'll carry this with you." But I stayed silent. Or the time he stood beside me on stage just before we went out and said, "Do you ever feel like none of this matters if we're not happy?" I knew what he meant. I felt it too. But I shrugged it off with a joke because it was easier than facing the cracks forming in our perfect world. That moment should have been the beginning of a real conversation. Instead, it became another missed opportunity. There's a kind of guilt that comes from looking back and realizing how many doors you never opened, how many chances you didn't take. I carry that guilt like a second skin now, because he was always reaching out in quiet ways, in questions, in glances, in silences filled with meaning. And I thought I was protecting him by not making things more complicated. I thought staying quiet meant keeping us safe, but all it did was keep us apart. People think heartbreak is loud. They think it screams and shatters and burns everything down. But losing Jimin didn't happen in fire, it happened in whispers. It happened when I stopped telling him he mattered, when I let our moments pass like wind through my fingers. There was a time when he used to text me first about everything, his doubts, his excitement, his stupid little thoughts at 2 a.m. I used to be the person he ran to before the world saw any part of him. Then one day, the texts became fewer, the calls became shorter, and I told myself it was just life, just schedules, just fatigue. But deep down, I knew he was pulling back, and I didn't chase after him. I let pride and fear hold me in place when I should have run after him screaming, "Please don't go, we haven't finished our story." I remember the last message he sent before everything truly changed. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't even emotional. Just a simple, "Hope you're doing okay. You've seemed quiet lately." And I didn't respond, not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know how. How do you explain that you're quiet because you're afraid, that you're distant because you care too much, that you're silent because you don't trust your voice to hold everything you feel? So I waited. One day turned into two into a week into a silence that still echoes in my head. And he never messaged again. I can't blame him. He tried, he reached out, he gave me every chance to meet him halfway. And I failed him not with malice, but with inaction. And sometimes that's worse. Because there was love. There was so much love. But love without expression, it starves. I should have said so many things. "I miss you. You don't have to do this alone. I don't care about the cameras or the contracts or the consequences. I just want you to be okay. And most of all, I'm sorry I let the world's noise drown out the sound of us." But I didn't say any of it. And now his absence is louder than his presence ever was. That's the thing they never tell you about losing someone who's still alive. You see them everywhere. In songs, in scents, in moments you want to share. And you carry all the things you never said, like stones in your pockets, quiet, invisible, but unbearably heavy. Sometimes I wonder what would happen if I called him right now. If I just hit send. If I wrote, "I'm sorry, I miss you, can we talk?" But what if he's already moved on? What if I'm a chapter he's already closed? What if my silence was the final word in our story? I wish I knew. I wish I had been braver. Because the truth is, I didn't lose Jimin all at once. I lost him every time. I chose silence over truth. And the part of me that still loves him, that part lives with the weight of every word I never said. Let me know when you're ready for part 5 by typing Lanja.
There wasn't a single moment that marked the end. No slamming door, no fight, no dramatic goodbye. It was just a Tuesday. The kind of day where the sky looks undecided, grey but not raining. We were at the company building, rehearsing separately for different stages. I walked past him in the hallway. He was on his phone, laughing at something. That laugh, I hadn't heard it in a long time. At least, not like that, not directed at me. I nodded when we passed. He looked up, smiled politely, almost like I was just another staff member, and kept walking. It wasn't cold, it wasn't distant. It was unfamiliar. That's what hit me. Not that he ignored me, but that I was no longer part of him. We were strangers with memories, nothing more. And I walked into the practice room, heart pounding like I had just run a mile, and sat on the floor with my back against the wall. I stared at the mirror, at my own reflection, wondering when I stopped recognizing the person looking back. When did I stop showing up for him? When did I stop showing up for myself? We had shared years of moments, of secrets, of laughter that made our stomachs hurt, of pain we never told anyone else. How does that disappear into a smile that says hello, but not I remember? I told myself for weeks after that it was just a bad day, that maybe he was tired, maybe he was just in a different headspace. But deep down, I knew. That smile was the final punctuation at the end of a sentence I hadn't realized we'd finished writing. I went home that night and opened the drawer where I kept the little things that reminded me of him. A photo booth strip we'd taken during a trip, a note he'd scribbled on a post-it that said, "Get some sleep, kook, you're not a machine." A bracelet we both got at a street market, back when we still did things like that without bodyguards or schedules. I hadn't looked at those things in months. And I didn't cry. Not because it didn't hurt, but because the pain was so old by then, it had grown quiet. It just sat with me. Like an old friend. That's the thing about loss, sometimes it doesn't scream. It whispers. And it whispered to me that night, "You waited too long." I waited too long to say the things I felt. Waited too long to show up when it mattered. Waited too long to fix what we both knew was breaking. And now he laughs like that with someone else. Maybe not romantically, maybe just as a friend, a brother, a new connection that doesn't come with the history, the weight, the silence. And I sit with ghosts, with echoes of what we used to be. And I wonder if he ever sits with them too. I wonder if he ever hears a song we used to love and feels that ache in his chest. Or if I've become someone he remembers with affection but no longing. That's the worst kind of grief, isn't it? Not losing someone to death or distance, but losing the version of yourself that only existed with them. There are parts of me, Jimin awakened, that no one else ever touched. He knew how to soften my edges. Knew when I was pretending. Knew how to draw me out when I folded into myself. And now I have all that knowledge and no place to put it. I see him in interviews now. He's radiant, confident, free. And I'm proud of him, I truly am. But there's a part of me, a selfish part, that aches every time I realize I'm not the reason he shines anymore. He found his own light. And maybe that's what love really is, wanting someone to shine, even if it means they shine without you. So I let him go. Not out loud, not publicly, but in the quiet of that room, holding on to things that no longer belonged to us. I whispered goodbye, and I hoped wherever he was, he felt it. Because I finally understood that day. He was already gone. There's a strange kind of tension that lives in the air when you see someone again, not someone you merely knew, but someone you once loved in that unspoken, sacred way. The kind of love that never had a name but lived in gestures, glances, and all the silences in between. The first time I saw Jimin again, really saw him, was months after that day in the hallway. We were scheduled to appear on the same program, a reunion of sorts for fans. They called it nostalgia, but to me, it felt like walking into a museum where one of the exhibits was your own broken heart. I told myself I was fine, that it was just work, that I'd nod, smile, be professional. But my heart didn't care about professionalism. When I saw him, standing just off stage in a simple black outfit, his hands tucked into his pockets, eyes focused on something distant, I felt like I had been thrown into a memory. He looked older, not physically, emotionally. Like he had let go of something I was still clinging to. He turned, eventually, our eyes met. And for the briefest moment, it was like no time had passed. That invisible thread between us, the one I thought I'd cut, tugged at something inside me I didn't know was still alive. But then he smiled. Not the soft smile meant just for me. Not the warm, familiar one I used to read like a language. No, it was the kind of smile you give someone you used to know, kind, distant, safe. And it shattered me. I smiled back, of course, because what else could I do? But inside, everything was unraveling. We performed, we laughed on stage, we answered questions, teased each other in the way fans loved. To anyone watching, it probably looked like nothing had changed. But everything had. The space between us was wider now, filled with words we never said and feelings we never faced. I noticed how he kept a subtle distance, not in rudeness, but in self-preservation, like he was protecting himself from slipping back into something we'd both barely survived. And I understood that. I respected it. But it didn't make it any easier. After the show, we ended up in the same green room, just us. Everyone else had gone to meetings, debriefs, other schedules. We sat in silence for a while, both sipping lukewarm coffee like it mattered. Then he said softly, "You've been doing well." I nodded, "You too." More silence. Then I looked at him, really looked, and I said, "I miss talking to you." He didn't react right away, just stared into his cup like he was searching for the right response. Then he said, "We had good conversations." Not "I miss you too." Not "Me too, Kook." Just a neutral, past tense sentence wrapped in diplomacy. And I understood. That door wasn't just closed, it had been locked from the inside. We talked a little longer, surface stuff, music, projects, the fans, but the real conversation, the one our eyes kept asking for, it never came. When he left the room, he patted my shoulder gently like an old friend. And I sat there, feeling like someone had taken my lungs and replaced them with cement. Because I realized, for the first time, that healing doesn't always mean returning. Sometimes people heal by not coming back. And sometimes, when you break something beautiful, you don't get to put it back together. You just carry the pieces. He didn't owe me softness, not anymore. Not after all the silences I gave him. And yet part of me still hoped. Still searched his face for that flicker of something, of us. But it wasn't there. And maybe that's okay. Maybe this is what moving on looks like. Quiet, dignified, heavy. And maybe that day wasn't just the first time I saw him again. Maybe it was the last time I saw the version of him that used to belong to me. People think love always has to be loud. They imagine grand gestures, shouted confessions, emotional breakdowns in the rain. But that's not how it always goes. Sometimes love is quiet. It sits in a corner of your chest, breathing softly even after the person is gone. It doesn't scream or beg to be seen, it just exists quietly. That's what Jimin became to me. A quiet kind of love, one I didn't fully understand until long after it was too late. Even now I find traces of him in the smallest places, a scent on someone else's jacket, the way a phrase rolls off someone's tongue, a chord progression in a song, they all lead me back to him even when I'm not looking. Especially when I'm not looking. There's a photo I keep, not one I ever posted, not one anyone else took. It's just him, standing by a window in the soft morning light, holding a cup of coffee, eyes half closed. It's blurry, imperfect, but it feels more real than anything else I've held on to. Sometimes I look at that photo and ask myself a question I've never said out loud. Did he know? Did he know how much I cared, even when I couldn't say it, even when I buried it under professionalism, schedules, and silence? Or did my quietness make him believe he meant less than he actually did? I wish I could go back and rewrite every moment I swallowed my truth, every time I told myself, now's not the time, every time I convinced myself that silence was safer. Because silence doesn't protect love. It buries it. And by the time I realized that, it was too late. People always assume that when you let someone go, it's a choice. But sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's what happens when you wait too long, when you don't speak, when you watch them walk away, hoping they'll turn around, even though deep down you know they won't. That's how I lost Jimin. Not because I stopped loving him, but because I never showed him how deeply I did. And I live with that now. I live with the version of myself who stood beside him and said nothing when he needed to hear everything. I live with the knowledge that I was the one who let the light go dim, that I let love become a memory instead of a future. I used to think love was only real if it lasted forever. But now I know better. Love can be real and temporary. Love can shape you even when it doesn't stay. Love can make you better even if it ends in silence. And Jimin, he made me better. Even now, when we barely speak, when we pass each other like distant stars in the same galaxy, I carry him. Not in a way that hurts all the time, but in a way that humbles me. Because I had something rare. And I know that, even if I couldn't hold on to it, even if I couldn't protect it, I had it. And that means something. I once read somewhere that some people come into your life as poems, short, beautiful, impossible to forget. Jimin was a poem. Soft lines written in the spaces between our lives. And though I'll never get to read that poem again, I'll always remember the way it felt when the words were still unfolding. I don't need anyone to understand what he was to me. That's the thing about quiet love. It doesn't beg to be witnessed. It just is. It stays with you. Long after the final word. Long after the final glance. Long after the last time you say their name out loud. And sometimes, in the quietest moments, when the world is finally still, you hear that love breathe. And you remember. Not to reopen the wound, but to honor the truth. He was loved. Even if I was too afraid to say it in time, I used to wonder what we were. Friends, brothers, something more, something less. The world around us was obsessed with labels, with categories, with definitions that made sense. But what Jimin and I shared, it never fit into any of those. We never gave it a name. Maybe that was our mistake. Or maybe that was the only way we could survive inside a system that demanded perfection but punished truth. What I do know is this: what we had was real, and no lack of a label could change that. There were days when we didn't even speak, but his presence filled the room like music. I'd feel it in my skin, in the way my shoulders relaxed when he entered, in the way my breath slowed without even realizing it. There was comfort in just being near him. And for the longest time, that was enough. But love without words is like a melody without lyrics. Beautiful, yes, but impossible to sing aloud. We played our song in silence. And I think we both believed it would last forever until it didn't. I remember one night after a show. The sky was clear, the air cool, and the city buzzed around us like it didn't know we were standing still. We were walking back to the hotel, just the two of us. No cameras, no fans, just us. He asked me, "Do you think people would understand us if they knew?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because I didn't know what us meant, not in a way I could explain to anyone else. To me, it was in the way he adjusted my mic before we went on stage, the way he stayed quiet when I needed space, the way he called me out when I was lying to myself. It was in the details no one else noticed. And that kind of connection, it didn't need to be understood. But when I stayed silent, he looked away, like he already knew the answer. Like he'd asked the question just to hear the truth one more time. And that truth was that we didn't know how to love each other out loud. We were scared. Scared of what it would mean to let the world see what we had. Scared of what it would cost us. Scared that if we named it, we'd have to defend it, and we were already too tired from defending ourselves. So we kept our love nameless, unspoken, hidden beneath the surface of shared glances and half-finished sentences. But here's the thing about love. If you don't let it breathe, it dies. And now I live with the echo of a love that never got the chance to live out loud. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had answered him that night. If I had taken his hand, looked him in the eye and said, "I don't care if they understand us, I just care that you do." Would he have stayed? Would we have been brave enough? Or were we always meant to be temporary? A flash of light in a dark sky, brilliant, breathtaking, and brief. The love I had for Jimin wasn't loud. It didn't burn with drama. It didn't crash or explode. It just faded. Like smoke from a candle no one wanted to blow out, but didn't protect from the wind either. And now, in the quiet of my nights, I find myself whispering words to a version of him that no longer exists. You were loved, I just didn't know how to show it. And that's the kind of love that hurts the most. The kind that was real, but never had the courage to speak its name. There was a time when the future didn't scare me because I imagined him in it. Not in some fairy tale way, not holding hands under the stars or in matching sweaters on holidays. It wasn't about fantasy. It was about comfort. I just always pictured him being there. In the dressing room after a show, on the other end of a late-night call, next to me when I'd finally collapse after a long day. He felt like something permanent, like the only part of my life that didn't have an expiration date. But dreams are fragile when they're built in silence, and ours were never spoken, only implied, imagined, suspended in the space between what we felt and what we were too afraid to say. I never told Jimin what I wanted. Not really. I told him about the next album, the next tour, the next project, the next that always kept us moving. But I never told him I wanted a life with quiet mornings, a place far from the flashing lights, a routine that didn't involve schedules written by other people. I never told him I dreamed of sitting beside him in an apartment that smelled like coffee and laundry detergent, arguing over what movie to watch like normal people. Because saying it out loud made it real. And if it was real, it could break. So I kept it inside. And I think he did too. Because even though he never said it, I know he had dreams too. There were hints. The way he looked out the window during long car rides, eyes flickering with something distant. The way he spoke about wanting to study something new, art, maybe, or dance therapy. The way he once said, almost under his breath, "I wonder what it's like to wake up and not have to be anyone." He never said with you, but I heard it. I felt it. And I wonder if he heard it in me too. In the way I always waited for him to go first, to speak the things I couldn't, to break the silence so I wouldn't have to. But dreams shared in silence are like letters you write and never send. They exist, yes, but they never reach the person they were meant for. So while the world saw two idols standing side by side, laughing, singing, dancing, we were carrying invisible futures that never touched. And when he started talking more about solo work, I felt a shift. He didn't say much, but I saw it in the way he lit up when planning, the excitement in his voice, the quiet confidence that hadn't always been there. He was stepping into something new, and I was still standing in the ruins of the dreams we never dared to build. It's no one's fault. That's what I keep telling myself. We didn't betray each other. We betrayed the idea that it was safe to dream, really dream, outside the roles we were given. I wonder sometimes what would have happened if we had spoken sooner. If I had said, "I see you in my future." If he had said, "I want a life with you in it." Would we have held on tighter? Or would it have crumbled faster? I'll never know. All I know now is that I carry those unspoken dreams like folded paper cranes in my chest. They're delicate, private, and every now and then they flutter. And I remember that before we drifted, before we grew cautious, before we let fear speak louder than love, we dreamed. Together. Silently. And maybe that's what hurts the most. Not the dreams that ended, but the ones we never gave a chance to begin. It happened unexpectedly. I was scrolling through my phone one night, sleepless, fingers moving on autopilot. The glow of the screen barely lit the room, and the silence was the kind that makes your thoughts louder. I came across a video, a behind-the-scenes clip, one of those casual, off-the-record moments from years ago. Someone had posted it on a fan page, digging it up like a time capsule. It was of me and Jimin. We were backstage, sitting on a couch, laughing over something I couldn't even remember. He leaned into me like it was the most natural thing in the world, his head resting on my shoulder, eyes closed, lips curved in that quiet smile I used to know better than my own reflection. I didn't even remember it being filmed. But watching, it felt like being stabbed by something invisible. Because there was no distance in that video. No hesitation, no fear. Just us, young, tired, alive, unguarded. And for a second, I wanted to reach into the screen and warn them. Hold on to each other, say the things you're scared to say, don't wait. But you can't warn memories. You can only mourn them. I don't cry often, not in a way people can see. I've learned how to swallow emotion like it's part of the job. But that night, I cried. Not loudly, quietly. The kind of crying that comes from knowing you had something rare and didn't protect it. I thought I had time. I thought love could wait. But love doesn't wait. It slips through cracks. And that memory, it didn't just remind me of what we had. It reminded me of everything we lost. Everything I let go of. People talk about heartbreak like it's one moment, one breakup, one goodbye, one dramatic end. But my heartbreak was slow. It stretched across months of silence and years of pretending. It happened every time I said, "I'm fine," when I was. Every time I smiled on stage, while feeling like something vital had gone missing. Every time I passed him in the hallway and felt like a ghost haunting my own life. That video wasn't just a flashback. It was a mirror. And it showed me exactly who I used to be when he was beside me. And who I've become without him. Not worse. Not better. Just different. Less whole. There was a time when I believed we'd always find our way back. Like no matter how far we drifted, some invisible thread would pull us home. But now I don't think that's true. Some people are meant to shape you, not stay. Some love stories are chapters, not books. And as much as it breaks me to admit it, he was a chapter I'll never stop rereading. But I can't rewrite it. All I can do now is honor it. By remembering it honestly. By letting it live in my music, in my silence, in the way I carry myself. Because he changed me. In ways the world will never see. And even if he never comes back, even if we never speak again, he'll always be part of my story. The most human part. The most vulnerable part. The part that taught me what love feels like when it doesn't need a name. I didn't plan to say it. Just like that day during the interview, his name escaped me before I could stop it. But this time, it wasn't on a stage. There were no cameras, no reporters, no fans waiting for a reaction. It was just me, alone, in the studio. I was listening back to a demo I had recorded the night before, one of those songs that somehow writes itself, pouring out of you before you understand what you're even trying to say. It was raw, soft, honest in a way I hadn't allowed myself to be in a long time. And in the final line, I said his name. Jimin. It wasn't a lyric, it wasn't part of the melody, it was a whisper tucked into the breath between chords. I didn't realize I had done it until I played it back and heard myself say it, barely audible, almost like a secret. But it wasn't a secret anymore. It was a confession. And in that moment, something shifted. For months, years maybe, I had been carrying him like a weight I wasn't allowed to show anyone, like a wound I kept covering so no one would ask how I got it. But saying his name like that, soft, unguarded, honest, it felt like finally exhaling after holding my breath for too long. I sat there for a long time after, just listening to the silence that followed. And I realized something. I wasn't waiting for him anymore. I wasn't clinging to the hope that we'd find our way back. I wasn't angry or bitter or heartbroken in the way I used to be. I was just grateful. Grateful for the love that didn't need a title. Grateful for the moments we never shared with the world. Grateful for the way he taught me to feel, deeply, recklessly, truly. They say the people who change you the most are the ones who don't stay. That maybe their purpose isn't to walk beside you forever, but to wake you up to a part of yourself you wouldn't have found without them. And Jimin, he woke me up. He showed me that love isn't always about possession or permanence or even understanding. Sometimes it's just about presence, about being there fully for as long as you can. And even though I failed him in more ways than I'll ever admit to anyone but myself, I know this. He was real. We were real. Even if the world never saw it. Even if it didn't end the way I hoped. Even if I'll never get to tell him everything he deserved to hear. And maybe that's enough. Maybe love doesn't have to last forever to be the most important thing that ever happened to you. Maybe some names stay sacred because they were never meant to be spoken too loudly. Maybe that's why, when I said his name for the last time in that studio, I didn't cry. I smiled. Not because it didn't hurt, but because it finally felt like peace. So if you ever hear a song of mine and wonder if it's about him, if it carries a certain ache or tenderness or longing, you'll know that once there was a boy who made me believe in something bigger than myself. And even though I let him go, he never really left. Because some names, they stay with you, not on your lips, but in your heart, forever.